Danny, I had no idea that you had such cool friends growing up in Hawaii. What happened to you?
Yeah, this week we had Oren, who I went to high school with, and he's much cooler, way more swaggy than I am, and a much cooler career. Started as a musician, going on tour, founded a bunch of companies, Gel Blasters, he's the CMO of, and now he's like a brand influencer, which is very cool. And so this week he breaks down the entire creator economy, what he's doing from a B2B brand influencer side of things.
Yeah, I learned a ton, and I think that this one was almost humbling from the ad platform kind of point of view, where Oren and these other influencers, they know how to manage and get the most out of these platforms, I think almost better than people inside the walls. So this was super interesting. It's, again, shocking that you are friends with people this cool. So let's get into it.
This week's episode of Taking Inventory is brought to you by one of our sponsors, Meet Market, your AI assistant for e-commerce marketing. Market isn't just another growth tool, it's a member of your team, helping you keep a pulse on your business and trained to save you time and make you money. It's also co-founded by James Barrow and myself. Visit us at withmarket.com. Now, let's get to the podcast.
Oren Schauble is a designer, content creator, and entrepreneur. He was most recently the president of public CPG company Unrivaled Brands, and prior to that, he worked as a product development and marketing executive specializing in regulated and luxury products. Today, Oren runs marketing at consumer electronics company Gel Blaster. He writes newsletters, including Product People and Hyper, and he also creates content on Instagram and TikTok, breaking down consumer and brand trends. So, Oren, super excited to have you on the podcast.
I'm stoked to be here. For those that don't know, who might not know, Daniel and I have a long storied history. We went to high school together back when we were just mini entrepreneurs, and now we're here.
Yes, and we grew up in Hawaii, went to high school out there, both moved to the mainland, go to college, pursue our careers. And so that's a good place to start. You left Hawaii, went to school. I think on the journey, you were a musician, creative director, a bunch of things. Walk us through all that and how you landed where you are today.
Yeah, I have definitely had a weird path to getting where I am today. But coming out of college, I was working in a music studio just as an engineer. I'd always kind of loved production and music, and I was just interning at a studio. And then one of the people who was recording in there and I had started making some music, kind of like electro pop music. This was back in the Swayze LMFAO era, if anyone kind of remembers that. And we actually we put some songs on MySpace. They got really big. They went on local radio. They got picked up by local channels. They got picked up, more nationally. And then we actually had a pretty decent little run we went on tour. We had a nice level of success. We did hundreds of shows in the courses of a couple of years. We toured with LMFAO, with a few others. And then that kind of came to an end. But it had gotten me out to New York, where I was, that is not the kind of thing that helps you make a living, especially when you're kind of just the beginning of an artist. So I was designing on the side and had studied design in school. And so I was designing for an agency. And then after I kind of stopped working in music, I was pursuing that path and became a creative director. But part of how it ties into what we'll talk about here today is what helped me make that jump from designer to creative director was I had been running early Facebook and Google ads for our tours, for our tour dates. And no one at the agency, and our agency had big clients, Grey Goose, Red Bull, Vice, all kinds of interesting folks, knew what any of that was. And I was the only person in the circle who had any experience. And so I kind of put my hand up that hey, I'll try to do that for our agency. And it helped me jump a couple rungs in my career. Got to work with some really big clients, on the digital side as well as on the design side. And then, transitioned over into tech. And I went to work for a technology company in Austin. Went and worked at another technology company there. It was consumer camera drones, the first company to really take that into retail. And so that's when I got a lot of experience building out. I had some experience in retail prior. I was in the outdoors market, but then really got into that camera channel exploding and the complications of that and drones and privacy and whatnot. But we kind of scaled that internationally. After that, ended up starting an agency, a product development contract engineering agency with a few of my friends from that last business that's kind of still alive today. Where we have about 40 engineers and we do work for kind of all kinds of clients in more complex hardware engineering. And then out of that business, I went and I've done various advisors and run other businesses, but that business has been persistent. We had an internal project called Gel Blaster, which was a toy company, basically think Nerf foam blasters, but with water beads kind of between that and airsoft. And we had spun that out of our agency as an idea we were working on internally. And then now that's turned into a really big business. We're in 15, 20,000 retail doors globally. We're in Walmart. We're in Lowe's. We're in Target, Best Buy, Dollar General. And so I'm back in that business as of, roughly the last, couple months to a year as that scales. And so, yeah, I've just had kind of an interesting run of, various technology into owning our own businesses, to trying different things, to now back in the saddle, kind of scaling another. And I've been started to create content along the way, and now we're here.
Did the experience of being a musician, like obviously, like I've never been one, but you hear kind of just, war stories about just like how competitive it is and how hard it is to stand out. Do you think that helped a lot now when, if anyone's watched your Instagram videos, like you understand the nuance of like brand and like how to stand out? It seems like kind of better than probably anyone, at least I've seen on social media. Like, did that experience in such a cutthroat environment, you think, like help kind of to where you are today?
Totally, because there's a couple things that come from that. Like, one is you have so much downtime in your life as a musician because you're like on tour or you're waiting 6 hours for something to start or whatever, that you really have to learn to use that relatively wisely. And you're also like constricted, like you're in a bus, you're in a van, you're in the back of a random venue. And so it's really helpful for me as a creator to just be able to say, hey, cool, I have 20 minutes. I'm going to like do this video or get this thing done. And then that whole idea of just like, how do you present yourself and having a concept and having through lines and visually what makes you stand out, like all that same stuff that applied there applies here, but it's just much easier, to your point of like, it's so competitive in entertainment, but to stand out as someone making content about like branding or about product development, just taking a few of those cues into it helps you make something way more entertaining than your average content there from people that don't have that background in like how to actually entertain an audience.
And what was the difference, you think? Like you said, you were early on kind of Facebook and Google advertising your tour, but like, how did that kind of change as you're promoting yourself and your music to promoting products and then promoting brands and now promoting your content?
Well, much easier than promoting the music is promoting the products, because people actually want them, versus being like, yeah, show up to this tour. You like, I've liked us on Facebook once, is a very different. So I think, really, it was just getting the framework right. I feel like everyone needs an introduction to these tools, and especially today. Like if you are in any of these industries and you don't know the basics of how these things work and how they're changing, like even today, if it's like you don't know what ASC campaigns are, or you don't know what PMAX is, and you are engaging in decision-making in these environments, like, and you can't like really explain that or really see what those interfaces are like, I think it's really hard, especially at a high level, to make good decisions about it because you don't really understand the tools. And so I feel like whatever the excuse is, whether it's running for your own business or whether it's just learning or whether it's just sitting with the ad team at your business, like actually just getting in the mix is super, super helpful. And I've tried to keep that going like throughout my career. And now as an executive in that, still be able to dive into the conversations and like look campaign by campaign and determine it. But I think it's that wealth of knowledge you accumulate over time, right? The more industries you're in, the more types of campaigns, the more, different audiences or looks or creatives or things you can engage in, the better. It's funny because that's actually a bit of why I started making content. Like I started making TikTok and Instagram videos about a year ago, or TikTok about a year, Instagram about 7-8 months. And it was because I realized at the last business I did, I was very operational. I was the president overall, and I was really focused on distribution and sales and product development. And I was coming back into marketing, and I was like, shit, I don't understand anything about short form video. And then I started to dive into it, and I'm like, I still don't understand anything. And I'm like, the only way for me to actually understand this is to create. And so I started making TikToks just to be like, all right, I want to be able to talk intelligently about it in the room with creators and brands and whatnot. And then I was like, oh, this is actually kind of easy. Okay, oh, now this is a thing. And then now it's changed the dynamic of when I am in those conversations, because I can be the authority on it. I can say, cool, I respect your opinion on whatever, but like I have hundreds of thousands of followers. I've done millions of views in the last few days. And so I believe I know more about how to make this content move than whatever executive at a retail store. And we can get to a more of a consensus around that. And I think that's just, all that to say, it really makes a difference to be in the trenches of actually using these technologies, no matter what level you're at.
Yeah, and it's funny, we have some of our listeners that kind of range from like people at the ad platforms to entrepreneurs to existing e-com, like growth people. But I saw a video you did where you talked about like when you're trying to think of new product development, like you kind of have to think of two totally separate worlds and combine them, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of the thesis is like things are so easily commoditized that like if you're trying to think of a new product, you got to come at it from like a totally different way. Love to just kind of get your point of view on that, because I think we have friends that hopefully are listening to this one right now that like are currently iterating on new products. And there are times when they show it to us when you're kind of like, I don't know, man, this kind of feels like everything else. So I thought that point of view is just pretty unique. I never heard it before. So I think it'd be cool for listeners to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I used to think a lot about this like 5 or 6 years ago when, in hindsight, everything seems great, right? But things were sweeter 5-6 years ago, right? When you were developing a product for Amazon or to sell on Facebook ads or whatever it was, you had like I had like a chart. It's basically like, hey, if you're going to go make a soap, is it cheaper than all the other soaps that are out there? Is it more expensive and offers a better experience? Is it like, what are the different things you can do? And does someone else exist in the market that's doing any of those things? Well, now all that's taken. Like, you're not going to make something cheaper than the cheapest thing that's out there. You're not going to have the ability to get something more luxury than the most luxury thing, in most cases, occasional exceptions. So how you have to stand out there, I feel like, is there's one of two things. The first is really niching down, saying, hey, I'm not going to make a running short. I'm going to make the absolute best running short for female runners that are over 5'8". And guess what? Like, that audience will pay the extra premium of 20% or 40% to get that thing made specifically for them. I think that's a really important differentiation. So number one is niche. And then number two is like the combination thing is the way I like to look at anything that's more, it's not like a necessity. It's not something that people buy every day that you can cater to them. It's like, how do you create a more interesting angle for something? I think that original video, I've done a few on that topic, was around fashion, where people were like, how do you make a clothing brand that stands out for men's? And it's like, yeah, well, like, take something that, take two things that haven't existed before and see what aesthetically comes from combining them. And the same thing could be said for packaging for a coffee brand or whatever. Don't just say, I'm going to make like a Gothic style. Be like, oh, I have a Gothic style with a Western twist or whatever it is. Like, I think that's the way that you find aesthetic differentiation now, is in the combination of genres. I think this was really enabled by the change in generations. I think for like Gen X for sure, millennials a little bit less so, and then now Gen Z not at all. We used to have like really associated with a certain thing, like, hey, I'm a skater, or I'm a this, or I'm a that, and I have my identity around it. Whereas Gen Z and the bottom half of millennials are very fluid. I may feel like this, I may dress in like, I'm in my Gothic era these 2 weeks, I'm in my mermaid core era the next 2 weeks, whatever it is. And so that lends people to be more interested in things that ebb and flow around them, which is an aesthetic opportunity for brands.
And on the platform side, we're starting to see this like proliferation of more commerce networks, right? TikTok has kind of come out and they've announced they're doing their shopping. They're going to do fulfillment. Meta and Instagram doing theirs. What does that mean for the kind of founders and e-commerce operators kind of having to distribute to all of these new digital channels, how to optimize for these digital channels and advertise for them?
Yeah, and I think it's really a matter of you have to have like an understanding of each, and then decide where your focus areas are. I'm a huge believer in omnichannel. I'm not a big. If you want to have $1 million a year brand, great. You can probably exist D2C. If you want to have if you want to have a brand that's more like 8 figures, you're going to need to be thinking omnichannel. It's just a better look for you, and that means retail, multiple forms, like being on Amazon, being on multiple forms of online. So it's worth considering. But I do think that. Like, for instance, when we actually talk through those individual channels, a lot of people think I should just focus on my one thing. And I do think you really need to consider all of them. And I'll break down some reasons why. Like, Instagram shopping and like meta shopping in general, I feel like is almost an add-on. Like, they didn't do great with it. It exists. It's not going to be a huge driver for your business, but it's also very easily integratable. Like, you can just use Feedonomics or whatever you want to do to make sure you're linked with your Shopify into their platform, and you're going to get some ad sales from it because it's an easy UX. But it shouldn't be a focus of your business. It's just a way to up your conversion rate a little bit. Whereas something like Amazon, a lot of businesses don't want to go on because it's complicated, it's hard to understand, it's hard to control. But at the end of the day, I feel like so much of commerce-based search happens on Amazon. Like, if you have a TikTok video that goes viral, half the people are going to search on Google and half of them are going to search on Amazon. If you don't show up, they're going to buy something else, or they're not going to buy at all. And so I do think that if you're getting branded search or category search for something you're investing a lot into content and time on, being where the customer is really important. And Amazon is one of those channels. And TikTok Shop, I think, is the most interesting one, where you kind of have to have been in early, but they're going to put a ton of emphasis and energy on helping the brands that are on early succeed, because TikTok does that for everything. And you can see it now where people are selling out of random sweatshirts in the masses because it hit like one video. I think that's the kind of thing where if you are invested in TikTok and you are making content on there and you know what you're doing, go all in on TikTok Shop. If you haven't gotten the full TikTok strategy yet and you're just seeing it as a shiny object, it's just going to be a shiny object. And so I do think that like there's this level of understand, like really thinking through where is the consumer, and then am I actually going to be good at this, and then focusing your attention where it can be. And I think for any brand that's in the 5 figures or driving a lot of search or owns their own category, you do kind of have to be on all of them and have a strategy, or you're leaving money on the table.
And when it comes to retail, I mean, that's something frankly, we just don't know a ton about. And I think we have a lot of friends that are D2C founders that aren't yet in retail. I guess 2 things, A, how overwhelming is it to actually get retail distribution? Is that just a crazy experience? And then B, do you see that a lot of this content that you're creating, can you tangibly see that what you do on TikTok and Instagram for these brands are driving retail foot traffic?
Oh yeah. I live in this world, right? Because I work at a brand that is, does major retail volume, far more than D2C. And we are actively using relatively complex models to then determine like what that drives. But I'll do these questions like, one at a time. So for brands looking to get into retail, I suggest just beginning the conversation from the start. So basically, whenever you've launched your brand, get 1 or 2 stores. Find like literally a store down the street or an independent store in your category that you can start a relationship with, where literally you're just like, hey, what is the buying process like at your store? Is that a corporate thing? Is there someone regionally? Are you someone in the store doing it? And then be like, here's my thing. I'd like to find out a way to get it in your store. I'll give it to you to start. I'll give it to your staff. Let me come do some demos here and set up. And then like start to establish that case study where, hey, you get on the shelf and you merchandise and you're there personally doing some of those demos. And then all of a sudden, whenever you want to go to a bigger retail opportunity, you then have this case study of like, hey, look, here's the amount of units a store per week I'm doing in this store that's taken us on. Here's how long it took me to get to this velocity. And you have like, you're not coming from zero. So I recommend that for almost any company from the start, because then you're removing this like separation from your online customer. You don't really, no matter what the heat map says, you're not really engaging with them and why they want to buy. And you learn a lot from that retail experience. And retail it's a sales game, right? It's a lot of getting distribution, is a lot of cold email and meeting setting and cold LinkedIn and, oh, I found this buyer from this place. And really it's about equipping yourself to go into that conversation. Because I believe anyone who's smart enough or has an interesting enough product can get that conversation. So then it's, what do you show them to succeed? And a brand I worked with pretty in depth when they launched was a brand called Chlorophyll Water. And they're in tons of stores. They're in Whole Foods, Sprouts, all these different places. And what the founder did really smart there and what we worked on together was like a massive social media launch, where my team was really tasked with, we need to get the word chlorophyll and chlorophyll water especially, we need to get to the top of SEO. And he had this massive seeding campaign where he gave away a ton of product to influencers to get attention to the category. And it worked really well. It was like 1 billion hashtags on like early TikTok, and it became a trend. And then we were benefiting from the SEO, but that package is the story that he took to retail. He's like, new category. We created it, and look at all these influencer posts. So all of your customers are seeing this. And then look what happens when they Google it. We're number one. We're the direction of the traffic. So if you want to take advantage of this moment that's happening that we engineered, then you should be the retail outlet for that. And that's something that really, really resonated as a story with those retail stores who said, yeah, we want to take a chance on this kind of thing. And I think that's the kind of thing that most categories should take advantage of, is if we're generating attention, not all of it's going to transition online. You can have that conversation at a macro level with retail. And then at the micro level, what we look at, like I was just in this data look yesterday, is, a lot of retailers will have opportunities to look at by store. Like Walmart has a platform called Luminate where it gives you data around your category, around like your store by store sales, that kind of thing. And you can then, if you have a good team internally, layer that over. Here's where our influencer reach is. Here's the statistics that we're getting back from what we see in Spark ads, what we see wherever else we are. And we're saying, hey, when we do a campaign really focused on the South with that demographic, is it having a retail pickup regionally? Or if, and one of the things that I'm dealing with this right now is a lot of influencers are in LA and New York. I have great influencer penetration inside California and the Northeast, but that's not where my customer is. And so we're like, all right, how do you shift your influencer strategy to people that impact more of these other areas? And that's the kind of things that luckily we have enough data now to sift through. You just need to have thought of it from that perspective and be willing to say, maybe I can't get down to my exact dollar return on ad spend, but I can at least look at lift versus baseline and understand it like what I'm doing at a macro level.
And when it comes to the influencers, have you found, this is something that we've talked about internally a bit, just like, given that like what you're describing is like almost like influencers are kind of the new publishers, right? Like you're not even at that point, you're like, it's not about Instagram or TikTok. It's about the people and the place and where their reach is. Is there like a Nielsen for influencers yet? Like, is there a way to know really what you're getting, or it's all just trial and error at this point?
No, it's a lot of like, it's less, it's more just research. It's more when you compile a list, and the agencies are good at this, right? Because they have historicals based on who performed prior. Is luckily like you can get through there's, I forget the name of the one platform, but there's one, I have to do it all the time when I do ads, where they'll make me sign up and it automatically gives them access to my Instagram analytics and stuff, and they can pull it into their platform. But like you can get the analytics of the posts that you do with an influencer. And you can also look at them and be like, all right, you can get their audience demographics, which everyone asks for. So you can see by state and by city and stuff where their top audiences are. You can see what their ratios on their posts. What I love about Reels now is you can't hide if your shit's trash, right? If someone's hiding their likes, then they're not doing well. And you can see it on Reels, if they're hiding their likes and they're still getting hundreds of thousands of views, great. But a lot of these influencers that were kind of bigger in the past or don't get as much, like you can't hide it in short form video. Like those views are real, and you can see the engagement level on it. And so as long as you're just validating the lists that you make, I think you have a really good opportunity. And one thing I recommend a lot, I actually made a video about it days ago, and I do this at every project I do, is we give away tons of product to influencers between 50 and 200K. Like, I mean, 20, 50 DMs a day giving free product to then see if people post and are they engaging and are they like, if they can generate some attention just by tagging us in a story, it's like, that's a pretty good sign. And we track this all to say, those are people that should be involved in a paid campaign. So you're almost stair stepping people up. Give them something free. Are they excited? Do they engage? Do they post something? Do we get any level of results? Okay, now give them an entry level deal. Okay, did the entry level deal go well? Great. Give them a multi-part series. Because that's where I think the real opportunity is a lot of brands just be doing one-off video. Like, I don't even take that in my personal sponsorships anymore. It's like, we have to do 2 or 3. Because otherwise it's just, you have to storytell and then convert. And like, people need to treat influencers like that. And it's a better deal for them. It's a better way to tell that story. And so I do think that's what brands should think about too, is like, if I'm trying to impact Christmas, have them seed it in October, follow up with another post beforehand and hit them with the CTA then, because that's how people think. It's not just a one-off and then expect all your results there.
A quick break from one of our sponsors. Meet Market, your AI assistant for e-commerce marketing. Market isn't just another growth tool. It's a member of your team, helping you keep a pulse on your business and trained to save you time and make you money. It's also co-founded by James Barrow and myself. Visit us at withmarket.com. Now back to the podcast.
And influencers, you mentioned you're targeting ones between 50, 200,000. Years past, it was really for free. But years past, it was really targeting the macro influencers, right? The generalized ones that had millions of followers. But it seems like now it's almost similar to your niching down strategy for brands, but kind of niching down for influencers that have a very specific audience,
100%.
Strong community. And so, I would almost put you in that category, right? You have a very specific topic that you're an expert at, that you discuss, that people want to learn more about, but it's not for everyone. And so what do you think that trend looks like for influencers and for brands engaging with these kind of more niche communities?
Yeah, I think niche is way more useful. It's just way harder to execute, right? So like, I agree. Like, I get a premium over most people my size because I have a really engaged audience that's all decision makers. And if you're a piece of software, you can reach those people really well. And I have a really great like A+ list of sponsors that work from that, and they're doing the right thing. They're hunting down the people they think are going to help make a decision maker. And I also now know the other like 6 or 8 people who are roughly my size in this niche who are also in that. And we can, as a group, have a conversation about, okay, well, like, do we really believe in this thing, or do we like this brand, and like, that's interesting. And you kind of get this level of power around like what you can make move that I think has yet to really be explored. But yeah, like, the macro is great if you have a macro level product. I mean, I work day to day on a macro level product. We're in 20,000 retail stores. So for me to engage with a 10 million person on YouTube makes sense because I have a widespread appeal to get it. For most brands, it doesn't, and they should niche down. It's just researching and finding those people is still, there's a bunch of platforms and things for it, but it's still just a lot of searching and legwork and letting the algorithms bring people to you and tracking it that actually gets you to those lists of people. But I completely agree, niche is way better. And it's just a matter of like, can you find enough people in the niche and engage enough of them to get to your end result? But I do feel like, especially over time, and especially with the ability to combine multiple campaigns, like, we're doing an influencer post that's paid. We're taking those best paid and putting them into ads. Then we're taking the people from those ads, making sure we're geo-targeting them at retail. Like, when you start to get to that level, you can really make a lot of this work, but it has to be part of these like bigger omni-channel campaigns that I think smaller brands will struggle to execute.
And maybe moving the conversation a little bit to kind of you as the creator, kind of how do you look at the platforms that you're distributing on your content, but make sure that you're not kind of locking yourself into an Instagram, and you're kind of protecting yourself from platform lock-in?
Yeah, I think about it a lot, honestly. And that's a big part of why I went from just TikTok to TikTok and Instagram. And now Instagram is bigger and better for me, but I'm really trying to stay on TikTok to like make sure I have those options, is because, these algorithms change and you have to assume they change. And so retained audience is the most important. My newsletter is my most important thing to me. And I have like 20,000 people on my newsletter, even though I have 140 on Instagram or 150 and then 120 on TikTok and 25 on Twitter or whatever. But making sure I have those people regardless of platform is important. And then experimenting on different ones. I've taken 3 or 4 stabs now at like, how am I going to do YouTube, which I think is the best social network, but I just haven't quite figured out the workflow in my day-to-day life for it yet. But I think you have to diversify. And if you're big on one network, there's no reason you can't be big on another, especially because they're very similar right now. But it's just a lot of attention and time. And then I'm lucky enough that I have group chats with other creators where we can really think critically about it and like share data. But if I was just thinking about this on my own, I'd be probably agonizing about it a lot, because it's hard to figure out, where do you put your time? What's the right platform? And the results are different, right? Like, I could have 10 times the audience I have on TikTok, and I'd still be making more for an Instagram post because those audiences are more engaged and brands value Instagram more. but it's also, I would never have been able to grow on Instagram if I wasn't killing it on TikTok. And so there's just like, it's this whole interweb of dynamics that's particularly interesting.
And do you have like a general kind of point of view of like, are the platforms like your friend or not? Because we were at Snap, and to be honest, we probably could have advocated for this in a different way, but like there was a point where there was all these influencer campaigns happening, and the point of view of like a pre-IPO Snap was like, all right, they're getting money, we're not getting money. And so like it was a game of whack-a-mole, and it was, I think, like not maybe the most long-term thinking, but it was what it was. Do you have a take? Like,
no, they're not your friend, yeah, like, and it is what it is. And I'd love them to be the friend. But like you see, it's funny because even sometimes in their own, I think a lot of it has to do with what you mentioned. Like I have monetization on my Instagram account. Like I'm monetized on Reels. I got like $35 this month. I got $35,000 in sponsorships. Like there's a delta there that Instagram is not getting money on, right? And they're also like, there's arbitrage they haven't figured out of how to direct that value. And they're probably too antiquated to ever do that. And also they don't take customer service seriously enough to deal with the issues that come up for people impersonating you and for like losing accounts and like, not being able to set up new ad accounts because you're always permission blocked for whatever, all the things everyone listening to this pod knows about. And if they took that stuff really seriously, I think people would have a really good sentiment on them. But as of now, I think we all live a bit in fear. I know what happened previously. Like I used to have, to go back to music, we had 50,000 fans on Facebook. And then one day, all of a sudden, reach dropped to 10% of what it was. And I had to pay to access them. And we had grown that following a lot through ads, which we paid for anyway. I still feel some type of way about it because we probably spent, tens of thousands of dollars on that to then to have to be able to pay to reach those people again. And I think that's going to happen to any of these platforms, TikTok, Instagram, et cetera. I think the only one that has consistently really had creators in mind and done right by them is YouTube, which is still, in my opinion, like the best social network, even though it's one I'm not super active on. But even them, it's a publicly held company. At the end of the day, they're going to make decisions that are right for their shareholders. And so I think it's a matter of, being optimistic about it, trying to form those relationships. I believe this could all get better in the future, but also understanding where you're really at and not relying too much on expecting them to do the right thing for you.
It's funny. I think like the scariest thing that you said, like for our friends that work at the social networks listening to this, is that you and other creators all have a group chat together, because like it really is that like it's the, they have so much leverage in the lack of transparency that they basically give. And like you can see that the creators are starting to be like, this is stupid. We got to like all kind of band together.
Well, and there's this interesting group of, what I like about one of the creator chats that I'm in is like, there's influencers, right? And you can reach random people. Like we all know everyone is heads of brands. Everyone is like, we have people at like VPs at Nike, investment bankers, VCs, like our audiences are the people. And so we also know that we kind of have the hammer. And all right, cool. If someone doesn't pay or if we have some feeling about something a brand does, like we haven't done this, but like we've had the conversation about what that power looks like. We're way more powerful than a Wall Street Journal article or whatever it is. Like you can really change the tide on something. And I don't think there's anything we care that much about to decide to do. But like that's an interesting, that torch didn't exist even 9 months ago. All of this is recent. And I think it's not necessarily in the social network's best interest to enable that. Right. Or if it is, to then they should be better in the conversation. But since we're not the biggest creators, we all are niched in our audiences. Like, how do they even identify to have that conversation and to have like a council that represents those people and to interact transparently? Like, it's a whole new set of issues that large, slow moving companies will have a hard time adapting to.
Part of the challenge too, I imagine, is like you're giving your content away for free. Obviously, you own your audience on the newsletter side, but on Instagram, on TikTok, you're not paying to put out content. You're creating that for free. You're generating audiences. They're monetizing it. But at some point you realize, okay, I have enough of a following. I have enough engagement that I, Oren, can start monetizing this. And so what was the thought process of that switch, but then also maintaining some, your quality of content and making sure, like you said, you're not hammering a brand just because they did something you didn't like or something like that?
Yeah. Well, you figure out a lot of this on the way. Like, I figured out pretty quick. I had a series of negative content, which my manager recommended because he was like, look, it gets more attention. And it went really well. It was called like red flag. I'd be like red flag wallets, red flag fucking backpacks, whatever it was. And it was funny. It was interesting, but I felt bad making it because like I'd make some comments about some brands and people working there would be like, yo, we had like 6 hours of meetings today about this. And I'd be like, I'm like, Jesus, like I don't want to be putting that energy in the universe. So it's something you have to kind of think through and struggle with. But like, the monetization one has been interesting for me, where I'm lucky that I have a style of content that makes it really naturally easy to say, I give value. So if you have a piece of software or you have a product that gives value, it's very easy for me to explain that story for you. And so as long as I feel akin to what's happening, I'm comfortable doing that. And what's nice is the core of my sponsors are all products I use. Like I'm about to do a bunch of content with Notion. I use Notion for everything. So I'm very happy to promote them. It's a very fruitful combination relationship. And I think the way I've looked at it, at least, is it's almost like ad slots, like on TV. I don't want to have too much promotion. I have way more inquiries than the amount of deals that I do. And the ones that I have, I'm like, cool, I want to do 1, maybe 2 a week. And I just need to pick that strategically for things that I really care about or things that I feel like will also do well as content. And it's an interesting balance, but we're figuring out on the way. There's no real playbook for this. And it's also figuring out like, how do you quantify and make sure you're driving the value? And what I think most influencers end up with is like, okay, well, if brands are paying me so much money, why wouldn't I just do my own brand myself? And so I have some of my own products that they'll be selling that are physical. Like I have info products that like I have kind of casually. And so I think inevitably it's like, all right, I can make more money for myself than for anybody else. And it's just a matter of really thinking about when you want to do that and then what that balance is between building audience and driving value versus trying to monetize it. Since I have jobs and entrepreneurship and have, bought and sold companies, I'm not pressured to make a ton of money off of this, even though some months I do. And that makes it really good because I do feel like the way to grow is just give away value forever, right? Like there's no reason not to. Like giveaways, I think Hormozi said this, and I'm not a huge Hormozi fan, but the one of the things he said was, it's like you should be giving away so much value it makes you uncomfortable. And I really took that to heart. He's like, if you're like, man, should I really be giving this away? He's like, yeah, that's the content that's going to work, and he's 100% right.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. You brought up just like creating your own products, and I saw this interview with Mr. Beast talking about how like his scale is so big. In theory, it's so expensive to run an advertising campaign with him, like, because you can't justify it. So he's like, I got to create my own products. Like that's the only rational thing to do. And is that like, is your sense kind of like
completely right?
That, yeah. Is that where all you guys, and if you keep crushing it and you get to some scale, is it going to be 90% of the stuff is your own products, 10% are partners? Like,
yes. Well, I think it kind of has to be because of the economics, just what he described, because I have a particularly high cost for the size I am, again, because I have this niche of decision makers. But I was talking to like my team about this recently because I'm getting more money than people that are about 5 times my size. And then once you get to 5 times that size, the checks kind of stop getting larger, unless you're on YouTube. YouTube is sort of the only place where it's kind of uncapped. It's basically you've hit the ceiling of your size to your value. And so it's like, cool, I'm already kind of at the max of what I can be getting like on a per video basis. And so then it's, if I can be promoting something myself that makes more than that, then I should immediately be doing that. So it's really where do those two lines diverge? And I don't know like what that mix is going to look like, but I know that that's like an interesting thing to consider. But for me, it's like, I have a project I work on, 10 hours a day, like my core job. And so I'm not going to go launch a whole bunch of other things while that's happening. Whenever that, say we IPO that business in a couple of years or, and something changes, like I want to be able to shift into it. But for now, I'm just like, cool, what is the right mix of the least amount of work, the least amount of conflict to be able to like continue growing that audience? And so it really comes down to your personal scenario. But I agree, like there's a threshold to all of that. And especially with info products, like you can make so much more money selling a course or doing a thing than almost any other deal that you have. And it's frowned upon in some ways, but like the economics behind it are just an absolute no-brainer. And so that's always going to be something I think it's in the back of most creators' heads.
And you did a breakdown, I think, on one of your videos talking about kind of the influencer and brand partnerships. But is this kind of why we're seeing more and more brands partner with creators and also creators partnering to create their own brand, right? Obviously, Kim Kardashian Skims is one of the poster children for this, but like also even the Nordstrom products where they just partner with all these influencers for different lines of clothing. Like, is that what we're seeing? And do you think that just continues?
100%. Because I think a lot of people aren't, a lot of the people that like influencers I'm friends with are also operators because we make content about branding and marketing and operating. And so it's easy for us to make a brand and we can go hire people we know what we're doing. I also deal with a lot of influencers that aren't like that, right? They're just like, well, 3PL, like, what do I do now? And just, you mean someone packs the orders? It doesn't just come from the factory to the consumer. Yeah. So anyway, like you start to get the point, but for those people, they're best paired, right? Whether you're paired with a bigger brand or whether you're paired with an entrepreneur. And this is something I encourage, like every time an entrepreneur pitches me their idea and they don't have an audience and they're like, oh, I'm going to scale it through paid or whatever. I'm like, bro, just get a co-founder that's a creator. Like literally, like, and yin and yang this. And even with other creators, I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, would be better than a business that's just you and 2 other people in your niche that have like kind of different followings. Like, and since, especially because TikTok and Instagram are so demographics based, like if you want to see a, an Asian female creator, it's going to show you that. Or if you want to see a creator that's like an older creator versus a younger creator. And that's where I'm like, people partnering together in the same niche around that can give you ubiquity. And so I do think that the brands that are doing that are doing the right thing. I think we're going to see way more of it. And I think what's complicated is the outsized transition of compensation from that. Like a big creator is going to make more than any exec, just because of the economics behind it. And so then how do you weigh that value? How do you compensate that? And then what does that mean down the rung? Say your social media manager also has a couple $100K on whatever platform they're on and is promoting you. Technically, they should probably be making significantly more than just their job. And then what does that mean? Are they making more than their boss? And so I do think there's a whole economics around this that is going to be really complicated.
Yeah, it's funny what you just described. I said it earlier, but like putting myself back in, like, if I was back at Snap, you guys are representing like such margin contraction for the platforms and such a need for them to facilitate the transaction, because at the end of the day, they're gonna have to rev share like crazy with you guys on whatever ad revenue over time. Like at some point, someone will nail that. And then they basically are just gonna have to facilitate some of these purchases on the back end of it if they're gonna have any kind of control. So it's like
Snap seems like one of the best ones doing it, because everyone I hear who's doing they have like a series thing where like is like they're like the economics are great, they're easy to work with, and it's just like a matter of how do you actually get on there. I'd love to be on there if you guys know anybody, but like that's the one that people talk most passionately about as being well done. And so it's really what platforms are going to be ahead of that. But the platform scale is so large, I don't know how you'd ever practically control it with all the levels of niches and all the nuance of it. I think there's just no easily scalable way to deal with it.
Yeah, I don't think there is. I think the way is going to have to be take a huge hit on margin and share and be fair with you guys, and then make some money somewhere else. It's not great for like their stock, but well, that's what TikTok's doing. Is like the TikTok creativity fund it's not great for niches, but like Victoria Paris, who's like a really big TikToker, she got like 1.8 million. She's doing like 10, 12K a month in creator rev share on the creativity program. And she's very mainstream. It doesn't work for niche creators just because like it's CPM based, and like I'm not doing millions of views of video, nor do I want to. I want 40,000 views to marketers, and so like that rev share doesn't quite work, but it's interesting. It's interesting how much like they obviously lose money hand over fist, I believe, at TikTok, whereas Instagram is like a little more focused. But like the Instagram payouts are kind of a joke, and they're just doing it because, TikTok was doing it. And I think 4 years from now, I think that'll be a way better put together scenario in terms of how that's monetized, and that'll be helpful for everybody. But I do think some tools that would be super useful if anyone is listening from that is like, I want to do deals where people run ads for me, like Spark ads or whitelisted ads on Facebook and Instagram. I want to do those as a percentage of spend. That is the best thing for a creator and the best thing for a brand. If I make a terrible ad for you and you spend $100 on the ad, then I should only get $10. If you spend $1 million on the ad, because I have some of this where I have whitelisted ads that are the best performing ads for these brands. I know they're spending tens of thousands of dollars on, and I did for a couple grand. And it's like, all right, like I should be incentivized on that as well. And if the platforms are facilitating that because they're the ones with the data and they're getting a chunk of that spend, like I'm happy if the platform's taking 1% of that or 10% of that payout or whatever it is, just because I know it's happening. So I think there's tools like that could work really well. Yeah, the platforms can facilitate that. Well, we're going to make intros on that one because that one, the platforms have such high margins. They're selling digital air. Like they could rev share with you guys like crazy on that side of it. Have you played around with Twitter/X and all that the rev share program there?
Yeah, I have. So we have a friend of mine and I own a huge Twitter account. It's an art curation account that has like 500,000 followers that does like crazy impressions. But it's funny because the CPMs on that are the way that the Twitter payouts work is the CPMs are by the value of the audience, and they value the art audience not at all. Let me tell you that, versus like the finance audience. And so like we're getting some payouts on there. It's better than nothing. But I also just like Twitter's just such a like I like Twitter. I was on Twitter first, of all of the places I'm on. But like it's just not a serious platform to me, and like I can't imagine waking up every day to create content to make money on Twitter. It sounds terrible, honestly.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of close out the conversation, we've got just a few more questions. I think we'll fire through that I think are a little more generalized. But as you're talking about kind of content creators and kind of how they're working with the platforms or not working with the platforms, what do you think maybe is the biggest misconception about content creation in general?
Interesting. I think I think there's just really people are understanding different types of creators. I think as an individual or as an entrepreneur, is like you should be creating content. Content creation is, once you break the seal, kind of easy and ultra valuable. And especially even for any business to just explain what your business is doing and give basic level breakdowns of how your products work and why you made them is just such a layup to help with your brand story that people don't do. But the other thing is like people make content for different reasons. Like I think that we still have this big thing out there of like influencers and people that just show off their lifestyle. And there's so much more content and value-based content. And I think the biggest thing that consumers and brands don't see is like how algorithm based it is. Like I encourage people to pick up other people's phones and scroll through their Instagram reels. And I do this with my wife all the time, where I'm just like, show me what's in your feed, because it's interesting because I don't see any green screen content in my feed. I make green screen content. Her content is all green screen content. And it's just like, you start to understand how different people's algorithms are. And I think people still don't understand that people live in different digital worlds, essentially. And I think that's a really core concept to unlock, to understand how things move and how you can take advantage of it. And also how what you consume can then control what you're shown, and how you should like be thinking about that consciously if you want to control what your digital life is like, essentially.
So, building off of that, what would be your advice to either a personal brand or corporate brand as they try to break through and build an identity, a social identity on one of these platforms? And what would you tangibly tell them? Here's the actions you need to take.
Yeah, so I would go on TikTok. I'd set up an account, go completely anonymous, not related to anything, anyone who knows you, and I would just make 30 videos, like one a day, and just get to understand what it is. I made 2 accounts before I had the account now that works. One of them I was reviewing non-alcoholic drinks because I don't drink. The second one I was kind of doing what I do now, but more CPG focused, and they kind of didn't work, and the videos were bad. But like I got the hang of it, and I had no pressure because TikTok isn't going to show anything to anyone I know the way like Instagram or anything will. And you can and also TikTok's great because like you do well, you'll get 10,000 views your first video. You get 1 million views your first video. And so I get this guy, I'm like, yo, no drama, no anything. Just go try this out. Do 30 videos over 30 days. And like actually try to get 1% better every video. And I think you'll go a long way. And then once you've done that, go make your real account and try it again and just redo all the things you did that worked and like start again and hit it. But I think we live in a great world where you can go experiment on TikTok and people aren't going to see it and you can see what happens. And then you can take all those learnings and then run it into your brand. And I mean, honestly, it'd be like challenge yourself. Like, hey, I have 1 hour every day, the next 30 days, I'm going to make a video. And, I could just be recording myself talking. I could be doing a green screen. They're all pretty easy. You don't need anything besides your Apple EarPods. You don't need to overthink it and just see what happens. And I think that even if you don't want to do it or you just want to understand it, it is an enlightening experience.
Love that.
And would you, for someone, if you're founder of a brand, should you do it as me, James Barr, or should I do it as like my brand account?
I think I would start as you, and then really think about what you want the brand account to be, because you may want the brand account to be you. You may want it to be another creator that is like kind of owns that. But I do like the duality of the founder account versus the core account, and I think it works really well for ads too. And most of the ads guys that are really deep in Meta, I know, love having a ad from a separate account that's a founder to run inside the funnel.
So then what, like in 2023, changing course a little bit, like, have you seen any brand or marketing strategies that you're just like, they hit it, like this killed it? Like what are some of your favorites?
Yeah. Some of these guys that are doing, these brands are all like sketch TikTok brands, but like Tabs Chocolate, Cloud Diffusers. There's a couple of these brands that are doing like, they're doing like 10 or 12 accounts on TikTok with different creators. And I'm doing that same thing. One of the things I'm working on right now. Where it's just different looks, different places, different identities, and they're running very similar versions of the same content, just with different creators at scale, is like a cheat code. And I think people who, if you know what you're doing and you can go do that and you can have the tools to scale it, that is super, super impactful. And then the other one, what's the other one? I think it's Esquisito Tequila. They're another one that's killing it on Instagram, where they're the ones, they're doing like street interviews. They're in Miami, super corny, super Miami tequila brand. And they're like, what should your expectations be like if you buy someone a drink? And they'll interview like 100 people on the street in Miami, like holding the tequila bottle. But it's like they got 100,000 on their second account. It's like a female focused account. First one was a male focused account in like a first week. And then the other accounts like get like 500,000, where they're just creating this engaging narrative content that people want to watch around their brand. And so you see these people who kind of like find their format and then stick with it. Is like it, and it's also a format that like some of these things aren't easy. You have to kind of step yourself out of the box. I think seeing some brands have done things like that. And these are small brands. I like to highlight that where I'm like, hey, you're doing it better than any big brand. And any big brand could go do something like this. The resources and time it would take is just like laughable compared to what it takes for a small brand. And they just don't, right? And I think that's an interesting dichotomy.
So the last question for you personally, like what are some of your favorite brands? Not branding, marketing, but just like brands you love.
Yeah, I love Flamingo Estate, which is this brand here in LA that is a physical location that does localized vegetable delivery and has a CPG brand associated with it that sells a really high end soaps and honeys and products. And they have a gorgeous brand, amazing branding, great high level products. And what I really love about them is that they started roughly in the pandemic and they're already a luxury brand and perceived as a luxury brand. And like luxury over a short period of time is one of the hardest things possible to achieve. So they're a brand that I love and support. I love Erewhon. We talked about before we got on the pod. And kind of what they've created as a lifestyle brand, I think is as a destination is I think super interesting to me. Let's think of others. Like there's small brands I really like who are who make really interesting things. Like there's a brand like Barrow I like for menswear. I'm trying to think of what really resonates. I like APL, the footwear. I think there's like niche brands again that do niches that appeal to me. District Vision's another one that really appeals to me. I'm a distance runner. They have like a mindful running brand where they've really thought through like what are the equipment and philosophies that matter to mindful athletes, and they've created stuff around them that I will pay a premium for because it's performance and because I really agree with the overall ethos. But yeah, those are all really specific to my life.
We'll add some of those to the show notes so people can check them out. And where can people find you?
I'm at Oren Meets World, OREN Meets World on TikTok and Instagram primarily, Twitter a little bit less. And then my newsletter is linked in my bio. It's a newsletter called Product People that is, I send it every week and kind of aggregate the content and some of these ideas. But come there, shoot me a DM, shoot me a comment. I'm pretty responsive. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's a VA. You get to guess which. And then, we'll see.
Awesome. Oren, this was great, man. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.
Before you go, we need your help. If you enjoyed this week's episode of Taking Inventory, then subscribe or rate wherever you listen to the podcast. And while you're at it, please share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend. We'll be back next week with another episode of Taking Inventory. See you then.